3 months ago, I ran a 2:28 marathon, just before turning 45 years old. At the time, that personal best seemed to echo some of our popular dialogue around the transcendence of aging. Can we live forever, or at least way longer? I increasingly encounter that particular current of thought, scientifically plausible but disconcertingly messianic, where the line between common sense and radical epiphany is hazy. On the one hand is a self-evident truth, that nothing stops me from continuing to live well and train hard. On the other, the proposition that I could still theoretically break national records is clearly untenable, unless they are age category records. Somewhere between those two poles of ambition is a foggier target. What exact level of excellence should I aim for? I still believe, at 45, that I can run faster than I ever have. But for the last 3 months, training has not been going well. There's been mostly sluggishness and torpor, an utter inability to get back on track, literally and figuratively. Albeit punctuated with brief glimpses of top form. I took second place at a local 10K race. A gentleman who bore East African heritage broke the tape minutes ahead of me, but I still managed a personal best. But then there was a very bad 5th place at a local 5K. I thought opening up the race metronomically with a couple of back-to-back 309 kilometers was pretty grand, until I utterly blew up, and realized I had been little more than a reliable pacemaker to the eventual winner. The normal oscillation of flow and grind, perhaps, but no workouts have pointed to a decent marathon in the near future. Therefore, a moment of uncertainty. Does one push harder, hope that increasing discomfort kickstarts another upward spiral of adaptation, or does one cautiously navigate a holding pattern, maintain serviceable aerobic capacity, simply await the next highly motivating goal? Or is there a middle ground between audacious and resigned, where I accept that while aging prevents a constancy of peak performance, I can still maintain a constant potential for peak performance? The iconic American marathoner Shalane Flanagan liked to quote a country song in explaining her late career exploits. "I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was." Every post-marathon training block is a rebuilding. You recover from the race, you lose fitness, you begin anew. But hopefully, each starting point has a slightly higher foundation. What aging threatens is even that incremental gain. You're rebuilding on a shifting foundation. But, just maybe, with judicious training, with careful modulation of effort, you can still reach a new altitude on the day when it counts. So today, we have a careful effort. The so-called medium long run. An imprecise label. For me, it generally means 22 to 26 kilometers at a steady but not reaching effort. We're trying to rebuild, even if we can't reverse time. I'm running today along the shores of the Ottawa River, on bike paths where Canada's Parliament often peeks into view. This capital city, my hometown, is a place that exudes quiet administration rather than raw power. None of the neoclassical lines of our neighbors Washington, D.C., with their evocation of imperial clarity. Historians often note the contrasting trios of goals explicitly stated in our constitutional documents. Canada stands for peace, order, and good governance, while America aims at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There are minimalist and maximalist goals in politics. And in cases where minimal connotes essential and maximal connotes decadent, the loss of the latter is not necessarily cause for mourning. As my aging body moves, I happily ponder whether I'm simply moving beyond my own personal era of decadence. Like American power in the decades after the fall of the Berlin Wall, unencumbered and triumphalist, I wonder if my youthful running was underperforming precisely because it didn't acknowledge limits. A decade ago, my post-long run refueling could look like a pizza washed down with an entire bottle of Cab Sauvignon. Even now, it's a good day if I bother to stretch. A decade ago, I spent 2 months in a cast due to a tibial stress fracture, likely incurred after running 210 kilometers in a single week. Like the unipolar hegemonic moment, youth and potency seem to confer wide margins for error, so mistakes get made. What we call the liberal international order also suffers the vicissitudes of age. Indeed, some discuss the subject in terms of morbidity rather than mobility, more gerontology than kinesiology. Like armchair quarterbacks pronouncing the end of sporting careers, there's no end of punditry listening for the liberal order's death rattles. But like an athlete, the community of nations is never in a simple binary state of either harmony or chaos, but always in gradations of health. In a recent essay in Foreign Affairs, Ben Rhodes, a former speechwriter and deputy national security advisor to Barack Obama, made an argument for an American policy grounded in, as he puts it, the world as it is. That is to say, prescriptive thinking that accounts for the chaos. I still consider our beloved neighbor the so-called indispensable nation, but it hasn't fully reckoned with its impetuous recent past, the geopolitical disorder it unwisely sowed, the financial hardship its philosophies exported. The results, in fact, that it no longer wholly commands the world's moral imagination. All of it flowing from the illusion that events can be bent to a dominant will. The world as it is requires nimbleness and an economization of effort. An Anglo-Australian compact on nuclear submarines over here. A hard conversation with Europe about artificial intelligence over there. Perhaps some transfer of green tech down to the global south. Working groups, rather than grand visions. You can't just go hard every day, make every workout epic, run 200k a week for the sake of it. Those days are over. Now, every day needs a clear and discrete purpose. Of course, you still need to cultivate hard power. All fitness has its irreducible foundations. Consider that all facets of aging, while unavoidable, have their mitigating strategies. Our body's peak capacity for processing oxygen, or VO2 max, declines, but hard interval sessions can flatten the curve. Lean muscle mass declines, but we can get better about heavy lifting. Overall body mass increases. We can maintain weekly mileage, stay trim, reduce donuts. And so, all the vectors by which American global primacy has weakened also have their palliatives. Chinese techno-military parity is partly countered by homegrown semiconductors. Impelling others to reduce carbon emissions is hard, but you can throw billions at the subsidization of your own clean energy. It might prove impossible to fully reunify Ukraine, but you can revivify NATO. Never turning back the clock, never making the perfect the enemy of the good. Many sense a need for restoration of normalcy in the public sphere. But what does it mean to repair institutions? Cranes and scaffolding now adorn the neo-Gothic splendor of Parliament Hill. It's undergoing many years of badly needed renovations. Notice that in times of disorder, just as in architectural projects, we usually don't seek an actual status quo ante. This building doesn't need asbestos repaired, it requires asbestos removed. The murals and frescoes that adorn hallowed legislative chambers might be truly restored, but sound earthquake-proofing requires new masonry altogether. Continuity and change, change and continuity. It would be a dangerous thing to plot our emergence from these weird and divisive times as a simple act of restoration. As Rhodes puts it, we want a bridge to the future, not the past. The Layer Cake Pearson building in Canada's capital city is named after a former Prime Minister. In an address that Lester Pearson delivered in 1949, entitled The Implications of a Free Society, he argued for a middle-of-the-road approach. Pearson was self-restrained by temperament, a Methodist minister's son, a diplomat rather than a politician by vocation. It was once said he was a good man for the middle innings of a baseball game. He excelled at quotidian negotiations rather than flashy theater. One of his biographers opined that his mindset was comparable to that of a middle-distance runner, the miler, who lacks the marathoner's pure strength or the sprinter's pure speed, but synthesizes both in a glorious feat. I was never very good at racing the mile, by the way. I never cracked the ineffable magic of that distance. Pearson did not advocate a mushy, least resistance triangulation of public opinion. He understood the hidden exertions that maintain equilibrium. He said, "It is not enough to merely keep to the middle ground. It is necessary to go somewhere." The history of politics is full of the obituaries of groups in society who stood firm but motionless. The parties of moderation in progressive society must also test their philosophical roadmaps against the signboards which are provided by the practical. The middle long run continues. I'm still measuring my energy, staying well hydrated in the heat, slurping maple syrup packets to top off glycogen. I'm running far enough to stay in the game, short enough to make this sustainable. At times, I notice my pace picking up almost without my will, my mind reminding me that this kind of moderation is still an instrument for higher purposes. I'm still dreaming of another race, where I can empty the tank. There will also be moments for maximalism. Ben Rhodes closes his essay with a warning that far from a well-delineated, geostrategic Manichaean battle between free and autocratic regimes, the battle for liberal order has largely morphed into an internal battle, a fight over values within democratic societies. He terms this realization a self-corrective vantage point. And so it is with aging and loss of vitality. Yes, it's a looming exogenous force, no question. But what will matter most the next time I toe a starting line is whether I accrued more self-correction than unforced errors. My agency still seems fairly matched against the cruelly dictatorial. At this juncture, my own discipline matters far more than time's arrow. From Pax Romana to Pax Americana, a defeat within precedes a defeat without. Endurance training is learning to properly race yourself. A medium long run, 24 kilometers, 4:14 per kilometer overall pace. A few faster segments sprinkled in, just to maintain familiarity with race cadence. On average, roughly 20% slower than marathon speed. The final miles tick by. Effortful, but restrained. I'm patiently laying bricks. Heading back west along the river, I'm now facing the headwinds, but still under clear skies. A wholesome way to celebrate your national heritage, fueling endurance training with maple syrup.